I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 14th of December 2021 held in council chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:35 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. We pay respect to their elders, past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available following the meeting. Confidential sections of council meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. Okay, moving on to item 2. Are there any any apologies or leave of absence requests tonight? Looks like there's no apology. Is anyone putting in a leave application? No. Okay, item 3, disclosure of interest. Councillor De Vries, let's start with you.
I, Rosemary De Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 14th of December 2021. Agenda item C4. It's an impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates. The nature of my interest is I am a current member of Lord's Gym. My membership of the gym will in no way have an impact on my decision making on item C4. Signed, R. De Vries.
Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, it just wouldn't turn on. Thank you, Mayor. I, Lynette Jennings, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 14 December 2021 regarding agenda item 11.1, Subiaco East number of significant trees. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality. The nature of my interest is I've been encouraged to bring to Council a motion in similar form to item 11.1 by a community member and friend, Linda Rogers. Thank you.
Anyone else on this side of the room? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, can I just confirm, please, that I would have thought a membership to Lords was an interest in common and that you don't need to make a disclosure, just like our rates. Thank you. Can I have a comment on that from the CEO?
If I could, through the chair, generally there, under section 5.63 there are certainly some interests that need not be disclosed, and one of them is an interest in common, and that in part A is described as a significant number of electors or ratepayers. However, I don't have the determination as to what a significant amount is, and nor do I have in front of me how many Lords members are actually ratepayers of the city. So it would be up to each individual as to whether they thought that was appropriate. But certainly that is one of those, that is an interest that need not be disclosed, but the wording of the heading is need not be disclosed. So once again, I think it's left up to the individual. Interestingly, as well as, and there's a conversation that Councillor Burns had requested, so I may as well do it right now because it's the same part of the section of the Act. Part G talks about the interest arising, G, that is only because a relevant person intends to become a member or an office bearer of a public service or state government or Commonwealth body. So that's in relation to that other matter as well in terms of elections. So to answer your question, it may well be the case. It's up to each individual councillor.
To avoid any doubt, I'll declare, but can I read it out just before the actual item, or is it going on block? We don't know, do we?
I've had a request for C4 to come out from on block, so you've got the opportunity to do your disclosure now or later. Any other disclosures? Nope. Good. Okay, so there weren't any public questions taken on notice. And public question time's going to be quick this evening because no public questions have been received. Similarly, there's been public statements received and no petitions or approved deputations tonight. So let's move on to the confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. We've got two sets of meetings needing to be confirmed, the first being those of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 23rd of November 2021. Do I have a mover and a seconder to confirm those minutes, please? Councillor De Vries and Councillor Kosovich. Okay, I'll put that to the vote. That is carried unanimously. Next up is the minutes of the annual Electors meeting of the 2nd of December 2021. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Powell and Councillor Kosovich. I'll put that one to the vote. That is also carried unanimously. Okay, that brings us to the announcements by the presiding member, and there's just a quick announcement to observe that this is our last group gathering as a council for 2021. So after this, there's a few appointments between now and Christmas Eve that some of us have to go to, including myself, but this is the last time that we'll be formally gathering as a group. So I'm sure you'll all have a well-earned break and be ready to do good things for the city in 2022. So thanks to all of you, and thank you staff for working with us, and it's all looking pretty positive for the new year. Right, we're getting on to the substantive part of our meeting now. Beginning with a possible en bloc motion. So for the benefit of people watching the meeting, it's intended that a number of the recommendations presented to Council tonight will be grouped together and passed en bloc, which means there won't be any debate on those items. So I'll now ask the meeting if there's any agenda items that should be withdrawn from the en bloc motion. At the moment, we've got C1, C2, which I've been asked to remove, C3, C4 is removed, C5 and C7. Councillor De Vries.
C3, please, could it be removed? Thank you.
Councillor Burns. Yeah. Correct. Okay, you're quite right. Okay, so in the possible en bloc motion, we've got C1, C2, C5 and C7. Is everyone happy with that? Yep. C1, C2, C5 and C7. So item C6 has been removed because there's an absolute majority required, and item C8 has been removed because there's a need for elected members to nominate people to a particular position. Okay, if there's no further withdrawals, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the en bloc motion. Councillor Kosovich and Councillor Jennings. We'll put that one to the vote. Thanks. Okay, that's been carried unanimously. Right, so now we get back onto the various items which are going to require movers and seconders and possible debate. So let's go back to C1, the proposal to include several properties in Subiaco's local planning scheme heritage list. C3, the draft waste local law endorsement for public advertising. Councillor De Vries, you want to move it? Seconder? Councillor Stroud. Councillor De Vries.
Well, this is just in way of just trying to raise this issue as an awareness with the community. I think when something as significant as this kind of change takes place, just the fact that it's advertised may not be in itself enough to make people become aware of it. So I'm fully supportive of the changes. I understand they're necessary, they're required, that we're following a certain approach that's taken across other local governments. But if you go and dig into the detail, there's quite significant changes, and I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that not only is it advertised, that perhaps we can go a little bit further than that, I'm hoping. But I do support this advertising, but I would also support some educational processes to ensure the community, once these are enforceable, they're aware that there may be fines for things that in the past have just been ignored, or there's obviously nothing that could be done to prevent things from, damage to property or damage to bins or all sorts of, there's quite a lot of detail. So the main reason for bringing it out was to just highlight the importance of the community being aware of it, and hoping that we will do some follow-up once these are implemented and the community can be given a really, the opportunity to come to terms with change, because I think there's a fair number. There's 26 on one page, so if we carry over to the next one, there's 28 changes in all, I think, modified penalties. So that in itself just suggests we need to look at that community awareness. So, yep, fully support it, and we'll be, recommending it to council. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. About 50% of the metropolitan councils now have waste local laws. It's entirely consistent with our waste plans under the War Act, and it's all about managing waste wisely, so I recommend it to you.
Any other speakers? Councillor De Vries, do you want to close?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, I'll call the vote. That is carried unanimously. Okay, we're moving on to C4, Lord's Recreation Centre. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Kosovich. Okay, look, I'll get a mover and a seconder, and then we'll deal with that. I think we've got Councillor De Vries and Councillor Hammersley. And before we go on to C4, Councillor Stroud has her declaration of interest. So we better hear that before we hear the mover and the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Councillor Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 14th of December, agenda item C4, The type of interest I wish to declare is an impartiality pursuant to clause 22(2) of the Code of Conduct for council members, committee members and candidates. The nature of my interest is I'm a member of Lord's Recreational Centre. However, this is likely to be an interest in common with a significant number of ratepayers. Signed by me, the 14th of December 21. Thank you.
Right, I'll invite the mover and the seconder to speak to the item, and then we'll deal with questions. So, Councillor De Vries, did you want to speak?
I reserve my right, thank you.
Councillor Hammersley. Councillor Kosovic, you had some questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Via the Chair, and this question was a question on with notice. It was directed through to the Director of Corporate Services, and I'll read those questions as I put them to him on block, if you like, and it'll make it easier. Question 1. Since the City acquired the leasehold of Lords and reopened the facility on the 4th of July 2009, please provide details on the total running and operational losses, or indeed profits, if there have been any, on a per annum basis. Question 2. What is the total loss incurred by the City from July 2009 up until December 2021? Question 3. What is the total expenditure on maintenance and capital replacement items carried out on Lords during the same period as question 2? And 4, what is the total cost associated with the replacement of the roof at the time of the asbestos scare? I note that I read from information provided already that 2/3 of the roof was replaced at the time, and that's May 2014, and I understand that cost was $1,633,000. Thank you.
Manager, Commercial Services and Property, did you catch all those questions? Okay.
Through the Chair, and thank you for the questions. We did circulate a response to all elected members yesterday, I believe. Would you like me to read out the responses to the questions?
Yeah, if you would, please.
No problem. Through the Chair, as to question 1, details of the total operating losses on a per annum basis since financial year 08-09, and because you've asked for them on a per annum basis, I'll just read them out consecutively from 08-09 through to this financial year. So 08-09, operational loss $771,727. 09-2010, operational loss $952,918. 2010-11, operational loss $297,286. 2011-12, operating loss $350,565. 2012-13, operational loss $230,062. 2013-14, operational loss $1,305,455. 2014-15, operational loss $2,199,463. 2015-16, operational loss $1,386,517. 2016-17, operational loss $1,177,676. 2017-18, operational loss $1,634,760. 2018-19, operational loss $1,472,007. 2019-20 operational loss $1,494,692. 2020-21, and this is year to date, operational loss $1,458,099. I hope my eyesight read those correctly. As to question 2, the total loss incurred by the city from 2009 to date, the total cost of $25,452,000, excluding non-cash items such as depreciation. That's made up of $14,781,300 of operational losses and $10,671,100 of capital costs. In the officer's report, outdoor recreation and the library were also referenced, and for comparison, the library's operational costs are approximately $1.7 million per annum. As to question 3, total expenditure on maintenance and capital replacement items. Since the city took over Lords, building maintenance, $6,499,167, and capital expenditure, $10,671,100. And as to your final question, the total costs associated with the replacement of the roof at the time of the asbestos scare, the city engaged Safeway Building and Renovations to remove the asbestos in the building, including that part of the roof which contained asbestos, and the cost of those works came to $1,663,000.
Thank you.
Any speakers? I assume it's a question, Councillor De Vries. Oh, you're going to speak? Hang on. Councillor De Vries, go ahead.
It's going to be very brief anyway, but I'm just impressed by those questions and want to thank Councillor Kosovic for raising those figures to us, because that does make it quite apparent that there has been a lot of investment, and that shows that there has been a commitment from the city to the provision of a facility for the community. And I think the need looking forward is how best to continue to support recreation in the city of Subiaco, whether it be in the shape of Lords continuing or an otherwise fit-for-purpose facility. But I think that the issues that have been raised in the report that was brought to that was the capital works, forecast of the capital works that needed to be undertaken, I think they're quite significant, and I think it does raise concerns not only about the life of the facility, but also the safety element. So a report that just further investigates where to with Lords is a really important one, and to not do it could result in an outcome that doesn't have long-term benefit for the community. So I'm just supporting the officer's recommendation, but also saying if we look back historically at the costs that have gone into maintaining it, it shows that there's been a spirit of support for a recreation facility that is important to so many people in Subiaco. But it was never built, Lords was never built to be a gym, so it's had an amazing life, and as we found out through the strategic workshop, it's actually a very interesting history, but things might need to change in the next 10 to 15 years. So I think it's incumbent on us to start the process of looking at that. So that's all. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Burns.
Just through you, as you see fit, as to some of the numbers that came before us. With regards to the 1.6 odd million dollars for the roof replacement, does that number include the services had to be relocated? There was air conditioning. There was actually solar heating for the pool. I think there was actually some other solar power and stuff like that. Are those items included inside the company? I forget. It's inside the works that were undertaken by. God, the name escapes me. But by the roofing company that did it. Are those items inside that? Am I sorry? I didn't know it was on.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that's correct. So the 1.6 million was the total contract cost. That included resheeting the original asbestos roof with corrugated iron, but also removing and replacing some asbestos cladding in the walls, as well as associated work such as those you mentioned, like relocating plant, HVAC, etc.
To follow, look, I find it interesting, but what's the point of the reference in the questions that were posed by Councillor Kosovic as to Lords' operating losses over this time period? And thank you for going to the trouble of presenting the information in the format. It's very clear, but the mentioning the library at $1.7 million a year and its operating loss, I don't get the connection. They're two different, beasts altogether. Is there a correlation here that I'm missing?
If I could, through the chair, one of the things that's important is a reference point. So just to provide information relating to dollars, it's always handy to consider that in relation to something else. And the report included two other elements that we provide outdoor sport as a local government, and there's nothing that says that we have to do that. And we also provide library services, and once again, there's nothing that says that we have to do that. So it's really up to council to determine. So it's more for a reference point. So each local government is different, and those numbers in comparison to would be different as well. So it was just tying the question back to the report as has been described.
Thank you, CEO. The only thing that I'm sure you could do it very clearly, it's, in the numbers, we use a single reference at 1.7 for the library, but if you look, and I know it's a reasonable, it's an extensive period of time from 08 through to this year, but you see 08, in 700,000, then up near $1 million, then we drop down to 300,000, and we're floating around there and get as low as 230, and then the following year, 2013, we're up at 1.3 million. The following year after that, we're at 2.2, and then we drop down to 1.3. So, we've got this going on. Do we have the same with the library, or is the library sort of steady at 1.7? I suppose is my question. It's almost out of curiosity.
Look, I didn't prepare the numbers, but the question relates to loss. So Lords has a substantial income stream in addition to the expenditure that's required, as well as a capital component. So the question was asked in that context. Library generally has almost zero income stream, so that is going to be a consistent figure each year depending upon the level of services and the programs that are delivered, whereas Lords more likely would fluctuate, particularly, for example, during the COVID period, and the budgets thought that the attendance would be a lot worse because of shutdowns, but that didn't quite happen. So a number of the costs are fixed, but there are variable costs as well with Lords, so it's quite a different operating model.
Thank you. That's actually provides great clarity. I wouldn't have guessed that answer actually, so I appreciate the clarity. All right, so that's fine. I think I'll just finish. If you, it's. I don't. This may be a question, or it might be a statement. You can take it either way. If it's a statement, that'll be the end of me speaking. If it's a question, it can be answered. I just want to make sure that we are clear, and I mentioned it during the briefing session, that that what we're doing here is really going to be all-encompassing. And I did, again, for the point of absolute transparency, just bring this up, not as some desired option on my part, but what we're really looking at doing is coming back with a, really from one end of the scale, which would be no Lords, to the other end of the scale, which would be a brand new, great big shiny Lords, right? Or a perhaps even a dispersed Lords, throughout the community, broken up into different pieces, into different locations. So all I'm really asking is that it's what's going to come back to us is really, I'm just for my own confirmation, so I'm not wondering why it didn't happen, but it's really across the board. We're looking from one end of the spectrum to the other on all the different things we can be doing.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, thanks for the question. And just making sure I don't enter debate, but the officer recommendation is described to articulate that if council were to resolve to do that, that council believe that the city should be undertaking indoor sport. Okay, so that's the starting point. And then the second is to do a business case to determine what that indoor sport may look like in the future. And there's multiple options within that council would go through a planning process, starting with part A, which is that sort of order of magnitude. And within that, all options are on the table for council to consider, and then slowly work through as to those that they shouldn't consider, to then be in a position whereby they would have something worthwhile that they can start have a conversation with the community and start a community consultation and customer consultation process. And so that's the intention, and then once that is concluded, that information would be brought back to council again as part of the start of the Part B feasibility process, and then you'd go through a narrowing down process once again. But yes, at the moment, if the officer recommendation is adopted by council, that would mean that all options would be on the table for council to consider, other than the fact that Part 1A talks about that we continue the provision of indoor sport, or indoor recreation rather.
I actually must admit I was actually confused on that, because I read Part 1A, continuing the provisions of indoor recreation, okay, to mean that we're not interfering with Lords as it is while we're going through this, where, if I'm hearing you correctly, CEO Cameron, that it's actually saying that in any circumstances, what comes back to us in one form or another, some form of indoor recreation will continue. Arguably, it could be as small as a single tennis court under an umbrella, but it's I'm just trying to be slightly amusing. But that's what I'd be voting for. That if we vote A, that even in the most minuscule way, we will be continuing in the indoor recreation business. So it doesn't really encompass the concept of getting out of it if I support A. Am I right on that?
Yeah, if I could through the chair, ultimately council can decide to do things in the future it wishes, but the intention of the way in which the officer recommendation is structured is that 1A is providing a clear indication that the council consider that the provision of indoor recreation is part of our DNA, our business, so to speak. The remaining components of that, part B is to then decide to what level. Likewise with libraries, we provide the physical building and there's a range of activities that we do within that. So if council are of the view that we should exit indoor sport, then that's option 1.
This will be my final question. Mayor McMullen, in that case, can the points be put up separately? Because I see commitment here if we move 1, that, you know, 1A keeps us committed to the, you know, to that, to indoor. I'm not saying I don't want it to be, but it's a commitment. And then B says commence a business plan, you know, case plan. So, because I don't see why, if I wanted to vote against A and then just still have B, that we wouldn't still be operating Lords and we'd be looking at business plans on what we're going to do in the future, but we wouldn't have maintained the fact that we're committing ourselves that in one way or another, even though it could be in an enormously reduced fashion, that it's just a little, A just seems a little confusing, that it's sort of saying no matter what happens, we're going to be in the indoor recreation business. It's for you to put up as you see fit.
Because you've asked, Councillor Burns, I'm happy to break it down when we have the vote. My understanding of point 1, though, is that if it's carried, Council will be resolving pretty much as it reads, that we're going to stay in the provision of indoor recreational services as opposed to exiting it, and how those future services will look will be dependent on the business case. So it's abundantly clear what we'd be resolving in my mind, but if you want to vote differently on A compared to B, I'm happy to break it down and we can see if other councillors share your views. Any other speakers? Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, thank you. This is a good example of why speaking with each other and is a good idea, because I actually hadn't understood the nuance that's been picked up by Councillor Burns. So thank you for those questions. I guess I had got the impression, apparently wrongly, from the informal discussions that we'd had in the workshop, that we would actually be looking at all the options. And for myself, this is very much a timely moment for this work to be done, so I'll certainly be supporting this project. But the reason it's so timely is because we are sometime over the next year looking to talk to our community about their strategic community plan. And I don't feel comfortable preempting any outcome about the future of recreation or Lords specifically before we do that, because I think it is a big community decision and we ought not preempt it. So I'd really like the work to be done in a way that actually does contemplate the entire spectrum, which is from exiting to building the absolute best community centre in in the world. Why not? So I really do want to see that work done. I mean, it puts a bit more of a burden on the administration to do it, but I think a thorough process for such a major matter will be time well spent. So I guess I just read the A as something that we were saying to our community now, not to alarm them, that suddenly we were going to stop doing it, because that's certainly not my intention. You know, my personal leaning would be towards the provision of these services, because I think they're very important, and we do have responsibilities increasingly being heaped on us from a state level, and one of those new ones is health. So it's all going to feed into that, and I personally doubt we'll ever see the end of the provision of indoor recreation, but we shouldn't close our mind to anything and have the full discussion. And this is a very long-term project. It's going to take a long time. It's good that they think the building's going to stay up for 15 years, because it'll probably take 15 years to go through a proper process, do the business case, find the money or save it up, and then build the thing, or build the things, whatever we end up with, if that's where we go. So I thank Councillor Burns for bringing this up, because I would have passed that with the wrong impression of where we were going. And so I don't know how the rest of the council feels and how we fix it, but I would prefer to get this project going, and if we could clarify between us and the administration what the project is, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, councillors, to the extent there's some different interpretations of the officer recommendation, there is, of course, an ability to move amendments from the floor if that would aid in the clarity of what we're approving tonight. So I'm happy to hear any suggestions that might benefit the interpretation of the recommendation. Councillor Stroud, do you have some wording or a question?
Thank you, Mayor. May I make the comment that if we don't pass A, what's the point of continuing with B, with 2 and 3?
I mean, my view on the recommendation is that it's suitable and sufficiently clear, but I'm hearing that there's some different interpretations being taken by others, so I'm happy to hear any suggested amendments to clarify the intent. Councillor Jennings.
Can I just don't see. Just to continue, and sort of question, I can't see if council voted down not to continue the provision of indoor recreation, what is the point then of doing a business case and everything else? We've made a decision. So, I think it's ridiculous to think of it any other way, unless you want to put while we commence a business case and so on. But I think it's quite clear. You vote down one, there's no point continuing with the rest. It's entirely consistent.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you. And I guess this might require an answer, so it's a bit of a mixture of a question and a statement. I prefer it to be a question so I can say something else later. But 1A in the recommendation, if that's taken out, the status quo, in my view, would just continue in the meantime, where we continue to provide the services that Lords provide, subject to, nothing happening where we can't do that because something breaks down or there's some other emergency. But that would be my impression of the situation. So if you just remove that, the status quo will continue, and then we'll proceed with the business case. But the question is, what is the business case if the staff were not contemplating that all those options would be on the table? So that's the difficulty there, not removing 1A in my view. Can you clarify, please?
Okay, perhaps, is this one for the CEO? If we delete A, will all options include an analysis not only of options which involve the provision of indoor recreation, but also the option of exiting that space.
Try not to change the debate, but the way I read 1 and the intention of 1A was to provide the community and ourselves with a clear message relating to that the council was of the view, unless something dramatically changed, that indoor recreation was a service that this council still wished to continue. There is nothing during the business process that would preclude council, through this business planning process, for council determining that actually they've now formed the view that they wish to remove themselves from indoor sport and that they wish to close Lords. That is something that is always open to a council of the day. So the intention of this was that we didn't necessarily as officers needed to continue to do any work in that regard, and that would form the basis of considering all the types of options that would be available for indoor recreation. So I don't necessarily preclude it that at some point in time, if council were to say, actually, we'd like some analysis on closing, we could certainly provide that as well. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but the reason why the officer recommendation was in there was to give a clear message that at this point in time, this particular council felt that indoor recreation was an important service of the council or of the local government.
Look, I'll ask a follow-up question. If council carries 1A and B as written, is the business case going to include an analysis that involves exiting the indoor recreation space altogether, or is it not?
Ordinarily, we wouldn't do that, but if council sought that information, we would provide that information to council. But like I said, with this resolution, if council were to resolve the officer recommendation, we would consider that some form of indoor recreation would be part of the service and we'd proceed on that basis. But there's nothing for council in the future to ask what would the implications be of getting out of the indoor recreation services.
Councillor Powell.
I'm just wondering if we put on the words indoor recreation for the present, that would overcome the problem.
I'm going to take that as a suggested amendment, which you'd be happy to move. Do I have a seconder for that wording? Councillor Burns? Yep, seconder. Yeah, but not on the amendment. Councillor Powell, I suppose you can speak to your amendment.
I think it's fairly self-explanatory. The problem appears to be that the continuation of the provision of indoor recreation seems to be a firm statement about the future, whereas putting in for the present would qualify it and say that is until this business case has been completed. Then so you do have the option then of exiting or remaining in indoor sports.
Councillor Burns, did you need to speak to the amendment?
Obviously I support it, but as a matter of clarity, and seeing we're on the record and we're being watched all over the world currently, because we're so popular, I don't want any misinterpretation, I think, it's not for me to speak on behalf of Councillor Powell, but I think what we're driving at here, councillors, is that, we are by no means foreshadowing that we intend to exit or anything else. We are just doing our job, and that's looking at one end of this from one end to the other. And to quote Councillor Hamsley, all from doing nothing to building the Taj Mahal of indoor recreation. So I don't see how the amendment affects anything. We're just putting it on notice that there is a possibility that nobody knows what happens, tomorrow. We're living in pandemics and all these sort of things, so I don't see how it hurts. It's just for the present. But I would hate to see anybody expressing this as anything that any member of the public or our community needs to be concerned about in any way whatsoever. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley, you're speaking to the amendment? Sure. Question, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my question's just I'm still getting the sense that if we pass this, we'll just be doing the business case on all of the different options of staying in indoor recreation, which may be fine, and point taken that we can pass another resolution at another time to do something else. But I was just wondering, if the council was minded to draw together all of the options, which includes getting out of indoor recreation, which I myself don't support, but there may be people in our community who do, and there will be a whole list of reasons for and reasons against that proposition. In terms of efficiency for the administration to do that work, if it were to be done, is it better to be doing it in parallel with this fairly complex case, or is it better to have it separated out in another stream?
Thank you. Through the chair, my belief is that it would be better to do it during the business case process. So as part of that process, when we're looking at, and to quote the recommendation, all of the available options, the exit option would be one of those options considered as part of the business case process.
Councillor De Vries.
I was not initially drawn to the words for the present. I was just opting for getting rid of it altogether. But I think going back to CEO's very important point, that we reassure the community that we are not about to close Lords, and I think that's a pretty important point, that I actually will support the amendment because it's a very simple one. It does clarify that we could look at all options, but I think that, again, you know, Councillor Burns, thank you for raising it, that it hadn't occurred to me that that might be some confusion in there leading to not all options being considered. So I think I would, you know, fully support there being indoor recreation, but down the track we don't know what might happen and all sorts of things might come about. So I think it's important to leave those options open, but for the present would be a good and simple way of amending this, so I would support that amendment. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Kosovich.
I certainly support the amendment. I certainly don't want to give the community the impression that we intend ending or have that in sight, but I think we need to have all options on the table. And to clarify, I think Councillor Burns has been pretty clear in what he said, and I think the amendment by Councillor Powell tidied it up nicely. So I think that's something that I could vote for.
Any other speakers to the amendment? Look, I'm going to enter the debate in relation to the amendment, and I'm going to do that in accordance with the meeting procedures. Look, I don't think I technically have to cite the particular rules every time, but it's 4.7 and 4.8. And look, I don't support the amendment because my understanding going into this meeting was that Council was going to be making a decision which signalled an intention to continue providing indoor recreation in one form or another. We're not presupposing what that form might be, but I did think that that was the premise on which the officer recommendation had been written. So for that reason, I don't like the words "for the present," just because it does leave open the possibility of exiting the indoor recreation space, which it seems is the intent behind the amendment, and possibly even the intent being expressed by councillors who'd support the amendment. But That would be the reason why I'm not going to be supporting it. Any other speakers before I call the vote on the amendment? Are you speaking? Yep.
I wasn't going to speak, but I either want to make a personal explanation or speak, so I'm going to speak. That is not the intent of my support for the words. All I'm searching for is information to be prepared by the administration which gives all people who have an interest or a bent towards what happens with how ratepayers' money is spent, without any presupposing of that. As I've said numerous times, my personal view is that it would be to support the continuation of indoor recreation, and also that, notwithstanding there's a cost to that, because there are costs to many of the things we do, and I'm grateful that the CEO did give us the library example. I think in the workshop I also brought up the fact that you can be sure that we are subsidising all the outdoor sports quite a bit, and I have no problem with that, and I wouldn't have a problem with us continuing to support indoor recreation. It's very important. But I think when you're making these major decisions, which have major social implications, but also major financial things, this is a, once in a generation decision. It's a biggie, and we should do it properly, and we should do it with our eyes wide open. And my expectation is having all that information will make it pretty clear that it's justifiable to stay in. But how can you stand there and say that if you don't have it all there in front of you to make the decision with? So that's all I'm trying to achieve in supporting this, is that we do a thorough job and get all be open and transparent about everything, and then a decision will be made on a proper basis. So, and probably this will take a long time. Many of us may not be sitting here, so I think it'll be good to do it really well right from the beginning. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? You've spoken already. Okay, well, you're going to have to give an explanation in relation to something that's been said about you during the debate, but if you'll confine it to that, then please go ahead.
Yeah, I mentioned that, no, I don't have any alternative intentions with supporting this amendment to get rid of indoor sports, so that's my personal explanation. Thank you.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, just to speak to the amendment, I can support it. I too was under a different impression about what the business case was going to be. I was expecting it to cover the whole range of options, including shutting down, or exiting out of indoor recreation perhaps. And also, of course, that may have included Lords, and then, as you've said, redistributing the indoors recreation to other sites across the city. Personally, I don't necessarily support that at this stage, but I agree with the Councillor Hammersley that if we're going to have this broad, wide-ranging sort of review and analysis of where we can go with this, these services, then everything should be on the table, and then the decision can be made accordingly at the time on the basis of all that information. So I think I'll be supporting this amendment. Thanks.
Okay, it looks like everyone who's wanting to speak to the amendment has, so I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. Okay, the amendment is carried 7-2, and I think in a moment we'll have the substantive motion as amended shown on the screen so that we can all visualise it. Okay, do we have any speakers to the substantive motion as amended? Okay. I'm going to look to Councillor De Vries to close then.
I think I've spoken enough. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call the vote. And that's carried unanimously. Okay, moving on now to item C6, the November budget review for 2021 and 2022. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Hammersley moving. Councillor Kosovich seconding. Councillor Hammersley. Right. Councillor Kosovich, did you want to speak? Any speakers to the item? Okay, I'll call the vote. Okay, that's been carried 8-0. Okay, C8, the nominations for the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage Western Suburbs Group. Okay, councillors, as you can see, there's an opportunity to nominate a member and an alternate member of this working group. And I think you all would have seen an email from Councillor Stroud earlier in the week nominating myself as the elected member representative, and I think Councillor Stroud as the alternate. Does anyone have any other names to volunteer to throw into the mix? Okay, the recommendations then is therefore going to refer to myself and in the alternative, Councillor Stroud. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the officer recommendation? Councillor Hammersley, Councillor Burns. Councillor Hammersley, did you want to speak to the item? Councillor Burns? No speakers? Okay, I'll call the vote. That is carried unanimously. Okay, that brings us to elected members' motions, of which previous notice has been given, and we've got 4 tonight, 1 from Councillor Jennings and 3 from Councillor Burns. Let's go straight to 11.1 then, Councillor Jennings's motion relating to Subiaco East and a number of significant trees. I'll take it as read, given that it's formed part of the meeting papers, so I'll have a mover in Councillor Jennings, and I'll be looking for a second. I didn't see whose hand went up first. We'll go Councillor Stroud. Councillor Jennings, if you could speak to the item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This is not a very complicated matter, but it is a significant matter, just like the significant trees we're asking Development WA to retain in situ at the site at the precinct Subiaco East on the northwestern corner of the precinct. The motion is asking to retain those trees. 3 Weeping Hills figs trees, I think they are, and including their root systems, which is very important because if they don't get protected and in situ, then the trees won't survive. We're asking, or this motion's asking, that they be protected during any construction works on any adjoining sites, and also that the area where the trees are and their roots is kept in the public realm. It's not incorporated into any development lot, and that there's sufficient area in that public area to protect the roots and allow the trees to flourish with their roots and all. There has been some suggestion in the past that Development WA was looking at relocating one of the trees, and that was a bit concerning at the time. The matter hasn't been clarified by Development WA, and the language that they've used to date has been to retain the trees at the site, or retain the trees. They don't say at the site. So there could still be in contemplation that one of them would be moved. That could be disastrous for the trees because they've grown together. Their root systems are likely intertwined because they're relatively close together and they have big root systems. Also, the way that the trees have grown, they're giving above ground support and protection from the elements, particularly strong winds. So, if you remove one of them, that leaves two sides of the other trees exposed. And we could have a disastrous situation similar to what occurred in 2020 when we had that big storm in February, where unfortunately 3 of the Hills fig trees fell over in the strong winds, and no one knows the reason, but the stadium had been demolished at that point to the east of those trees, and they were no doubt, well, I would speculate that they were providing some protection from the elements, and particularly winds that might have been coming from the east, or so that unfortunately they just blew over. So that was a great tragedy and loss, which also means that Development WA has got a bit more space where those trees were to develop or use for related purposes. So we've lost other trees, or other trees have been removed in Subiaco East. We had 23 trees on the significant tree register that the council in, I think it was 2018, they did that, which was a very, in my view, far-sighted move. And unfortunately, that was under the town planning scheme, or the local planning scheme at the time, which is not recognised and not operative under the redevelopment scheme that's presently in place for the precinct. So it's all up to Development WA to do the right thing, to respect our natural heritage and our tree canopy. We haven't got very many trees on our significant tree register. I think we had 23, 6 have fallen over or been removed in the course of Development WA's stewardship of the site, and we've got 1 tree on private property. So, those trees are even more significant given the loss, and also just generally the loss of tree canopy across the city due to private and other developments. Anyway, so I would recommend this motion to you. Thank you for listening. I hope I haven't gone on for too long, and I think it's just obvious that Development WA should do the right thing and keep all 3 trees in situ. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, this is an excellent elected member's motion and extremely well documented with the reasons, and it comes from the experience we've had with Subi East and the trees that we have lost. Important heritage trees of the Electors trees up in the southeast corner of Kitchener Park, all the way through to the massive ficus trees fig trees that were blown down in the storm. What it showed that was any interference with these trees and with their root system, and they become very vulnerable. It's very possible that the Development WA are thinking they can remove one of the stand of 3, and I think there's absolutely no doubt that if they start interfering with the root system of one, it will be whoops. Didn't mean to lose the other two, but there they go. So this is really important. I commend it to you. It is supported by staff. Thank you. And consistent with past council resolutions. Thank you.
Any speakers against? Any other speakers to the item? Councillor Burns.
Very briefly, Councillors Stroud and Jennings couldn't be more correct, and as probably to the follow-up point by the Deputy Mayor, I couldn't agree more that this is just going to end up with, we gave it our best shot as the trees are hacked to pieces and dragged off in trucks. So that's all I've got to say.
Anyone else? Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I just want to thank Councillor Jennings for the research he did in presenting this to Council. And I think it makes me sad to think that 2 trees were lost, or 3, maybe due to lack of watering during the construction of the college. So it's just, it's just really important that we do our best to preserve what is in effect, a lot of time and water that went into growing those trees in the first place. And as we know, water is a very precious resource. So I think we have trees that are beautiful and we should do our best to preserve them. But thank you to Councillor Jennings for that work. Thank you.
Okay, last chance to speak before I invite Councillor Jennings to close. Okay, Councillor Jennings? No? All right, I'll call the vote. It's carried unanimously. Okay, moving on now to item 11.2, the Rockaby Road Bollards alteration to the current in situ status quo, submitted and presumably moved by Councillor Burns. So I'll be looking for a seconder for Councillor Burns's motion. Councillor White. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Burns, do you want to speak to the item? Councillor Kosovich, you were going to flag that you want to amend the motion. Let's hear from Councillor Burns and Councillor White first, and then we'll take any amendments. Okay. Councillor White.
Yeah, I'm happy to support this motion. I think it's a quick win that can help improve the presentation of Rockaby Road. It seems to me to be one of those low-hanging fruits that we can start to address quite quickly and to start to really show that we want to, it's a very minor thing, I think, but it will be an important statement along with other things that might move forward in that space. Beyond that, I don't think there's a whole lot of time I want to waste on it, but I think it's a good thing.
Councillor Kosovich, did you want to describe your amendment and see if there's a seconder for it?
Yes, I'll read the amendment, and that is after paragraph 1, the words are nonetheless, the 4 bollards each upon Rockaby Road directly facing Burleigh Lane and Kenworthy Lane remain lifted. Full stop. Do you want me to make a talk to that?
Look, not just yet. If the mover and the seconder are happy to accept it, we don't need to debate it at all. Councillor Burns and Councillor White, what do you think of the amendment?
Is there a reason for it? I'm not against it. Interested if there's a reason for it.
I think if we're going to go into that level of detail, I might look for a mover and a seconder, and then we'll debate it. So look, you've got the chance to take it on board. Yep. Councillor Burns, are you happy with it? Okay, the elected member's motion will be amended as described by Councillor Kosovich. So now I'll be looking for speakers to the amended motion. We seem to have lost a paragraph. Okay, yep, it's still there. So maybe if we can just get the wording of the whole amended motion up on the screen so that everyone can see it. Yep, thanks. So that's what we're debating now. It's the amended motion and looking for a speaker on that. We'll go Councillor Kosovich, then Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. The amendment supports the officer comment, and that is that a trial will evaluate the impact on any issues supported with the bollards on opposite laneways, with vehicle access to remain extended to prevent right turn movements. In particular, that is with Kenworthy Lane and Burleigh Lane. It'll stop vehicles coming out of those lanes, as it does at the moment, and stop them doing a right-hand turn to travel north on Rockaby Road. That's what it currently does. By having those bollards remain lifted, that will be the status quo.
Councillor Powell.
I don't have a comment, I've got a question, if I may. Through you to the staff. On page 49, it says it's worth noting that a portion of the bollards are fixed and cannot be dropped, and it's expected to cost between $3,000 and $5,000 to remove and ensure there aren't any tripping hazards created. I was wondering if there was any indication of how many bollards were fixed and how many would need to be perhaps removed.
Mr. Millard, did you want to answer that or take it on notice?
Thank you for the question, and through you, presiding member, I'll need to take that question on notice. I don't actually have the number of fixed bollards.
Any other speakers or questions? Councillor Burns, speak to the item, thanks.
Thank you, and I do appreciate Councillor Kosovich bringing this forward. It should be understood that I actually audited the street myself before putting this forward, and then audited the street again with Councillor Kosovich because there were some minor errors in the numbers, and then audited it a third time on my own to get the final numbers. So I will offer this to you at this stage. We're only talking, I'll go back to the full numbers when we get to the substantive motion, if we get past this amendment. But as to the amendment, nonetheless, the 4 bollards each upon Rockaby Road directly facing Burleigh Lane and Kenworthy Lanes remain lifted.
Sorry, yeah. Councillor Burns, sorry to interrupt your flow. The amendment has been accepted by yourself and the seconder, so it forms part of the substantive motion, and that happened without debate. We are, yeah.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate you telling me that, Mayor McMullen. I hope I haven't embarrassed myself. Okay, the current situation is this. To the best of my and Councillor Kosovich's examination, originally there were 152 liftable bollards installed to where the medium strip was before that. I can break it down into the 4 sections of the street, but I won't just at this moment. But currently we have, and this is mentioned inside the staff comments about bollards being damaged and destroyed. We find no bollards damaged unless they would be bollards that are currently sunken and can't be lifted. So that is beyond us. But to do a general number count of destroyed, that means as in they're gone, they're not leaning over or broken, but they are being snapped off as such. We have 19 out of the 152 representing 13%. Currently, the bollards within the street in the upright position, we have 52, representing 34% of the bollards. That's the down, 34. We have 52 bollards that are sunk to street level, representing 34%. Up, we have 81 bollards representing 53%. So if you basically look at the destroyed bollards and the bollards that are up, it's about 50% are gone or down, and about the other things. But as to that, I will say that it's the most random patterning. I can't even understand where the ones that are, I can understand the broken ones are just gone, but why some are up and some are down, I find no method, reason or rhyme to it. I will note this quickly, addressing the bollards that do need to stay, 4 bollards in front of the 2 lanes, that funnily enough, in front of Kenworthy, is actually one of the destroyed bollards. So even though the staff says they must remain in place within the comment, you can actually exit Kenworthy and pass over the destroyed bollard and take a right-hand turn if you wish to anyway. So that would arguably something that have to be fixed. Now, as to Director Millard's comment, his taking it on notice, the only thing I could possibly think in the staff mentioning permanent bollards is that some of them are up and are stuck up, and they can't be lowered for some reason, because there are no what one would think of as a fixed bollard, as in it's concreted in. All the bollards are of an identical type. They're keyed. The purpose of the key is to release them back into the ground. The strange things about that particular bollard that was chosen is that if you lift it up, it actually just locks itself. So you don't need the key to lift it, you only need the key to sink it. So even if we sunk them, somebody could just, if they knew any better, could just walk down the street and just pull them all back up anyway. But anyway, look, apart from the levity of it, the staff are quite correct. The staff have mentioned that they were put in with all good intention, and that was to stop U-turns, okay? The island was removed. The island was removed at the time when the city attempted something which failed, but I think it was a great attempt, and that was to put a markets on Rockaby Road, which lasted about 3 weeks, unfortunately. So for some reason, somebody was concerned about U-turns. I wouldn't have been, but all of a sudden the bollards appeared, and have been there ever since. The staff are correct. Since then, the speed has been reduced. I'm going to be as quick as I can with this. I wouldn't worry, and the staff don't seem to be. I will sum up quickly. You look at U-turns, okay, and are they dangerous? Okay, look, it's a very thin street. Trying to U-turn it, and I couldn't, besides doing a 3-point turn, my vehicle.
Just press your microphone again.
Thank you. My voice is so loud I can't tell. What concerns me more than the U-turns is the bollards themselves. The bollards, without producing documentation, I would hope my fellows here would take this as fact. What the bollards actually do is actually create a speed. Even though we've reduced the technical speed of the road, the bollards create the mentality of a raceway. Not to everybody, some people obey the law, but a lot of people see it, that it creates ownership of the road, right? If you look at things like Bayview Terrace, where they've literally, you almost meander through that front section, people are going everywhere, there's car parking everywhere. Anyway, I'm getting the wind up by Councillor Jennings and I'm going to take it. So, in essence, the bollards are actually more dangerous to me, because they make you feel like you own the road, not the pedestrians. And that road is actually is shared between pedestrians, kids on bikes, and cars. It's for all of us. So the bollards create a problem. They don't solve one. And I'll leave it at that for now. And I hope others do speak to this, because I think it is important.
Any other speakers? Councillor Jennings?
Thank you. Chair. I'll be quick. I support this. I think they do look unsightly. It's all over the place down there, and some are leaning and some are down, and it's not a good look. And there's plenty of other places in Perth that don't have bollards, and people are not doing U-turns willy-nilly across the street. And I don't remember Councillor Burns mentioning that in his debate, but if he did, I'm sorry if I'm repeating it. Like in South Terrace in Fremantle, they don't have the bollards there that I'm aware of, and it's a big wide street and people are not doing U-turns. So that generally I don't see that. Could happen. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen because I didn't see it, of course. But anyway, I do support this. I think it will tidy up the appearance of the place. And in any way, it's a trial. And if it doesn't go according to plan, then we can revisit. Thanks.
Councillor Kosovich.
Councillor Jennings took the words that I was going to use. This is a trial, and if there are any problems, we can certainly not proceed after the trial. But I see it being only beneficial. They are unsightly, and I think they will certainly make crossing Rockaby Road for pedestrians shopping in the area a lot easier. Thank you.
Councillor White, you've got a question, do you?
It's about the motion that I've seconded. I'm just confused about the questions about fixed bollards and the administration's notes about fixed bollards. The motion is to unlock the bollards. So if they're fixed, they can't be unlocked. So it doesn't seem relevant. That's my question. Why are we talking about fixed bollards at all?
I mean, is that something you can answer tonight, Director?
Perhaps I can. I don't know how many there are, but if there are any, it was just to provide clarification that we would be unable to drop them if they were fixed, and if council wanted to move an amendment that we remove them, then that's why it was highlighting that fact. I don't know how many there are, but if there were some, it's just to be clear in the officer comment that the intention of this is just to drop those that can be dropped.
Any other speakers? Question from Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. I appreciate an amendment has been accepted, but I would have actually liked a trial too. If I can't see what's so wrong about cars turning right out of Burleigh Lane to go north. So can I ask where that came in the first place, that we stopped cars? I mean, originally, obviously, there was a pedestrian strip, but why is it, such a no-no for cars to have the option to turn right out of Burleigh Lane and go north on Rockaby?
I think that's one our staff can answer, but thank you, Councillor Kosovich. Mr Millard.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Part of it's to do with the location from intersections, or the length of the laneway from an intersection to prevent that turning right, and also to where there's any vehicles moving along Rockaby Road, that if they're waiting, and they could hold up the traffic if they're looking to turn into one of the laneways.
Any other speakers or questions before I invite Councillor Burns to close? No. Councillor Burns, did you wish to close?
Please vote for this.
I'll call the vote. That's carried unanimously. Okay, moving on now to 11.3, Rockaby Road planter boxes, improvement to the current open brackets, dated, close brackets, appearance and revitalisation. Submitted by Councillor Burns, who I assume will move, and I'll be looking for a seconder for the elected members' motion. Councillor Stroud. Councillor Burns, do you wish to speak to your item?
I'll reserve at the moment.
Councillor Stroud?
Well, I was on council when those planter boxes were first installed, and council wasn't consulted on them. I think we were consulted on the idea, but I got quite a shock when I saw actually the design. That, in fact, I was quite embarrassed because they were so out of keeping with the whole character of Subiaco. If you go down to Commonwealth Bank and see the wonderful sepia impressions of Old World Rockaby Road, you get the sort of idea of that story that could be reinterpreted going up the streets. So I think it's a great idea. We probably could also just paint them dark blue, but this is a little bit more imaginative, and I recommend the motion to you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Hammersley. Is that a question or are you speaking? You're speaking? Yep.
Thank you. Yes. I was glad to see this proposal come, because the planter boxes have been something that I think most people in Subiaco have been interested in for some time. But I did have some trepidation about it, because I think it's a bigger problem than just wrapping them in some new clothes. And, I did take notice of the staff comment that, perhaps we should be doing something bigger. But the problem is something bigger won't happen. Well, it certainly won't happen easily and quickly. And so I think I've probably brought myself around to supporting this on the basis that it is something hopefully that can be done relatively quickly to give the street a lift, it is a little worrying doing something that might not have a long life, but I think we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for a solution, and getting another consultant and thinking about it, and it's just been too long. So I think I saw a rubbish bin actually on Onslow Road the other night, which apparently is going to be removed because of illegal dumping, which is a bit of a shame. But it's in fact an example of this very type of thing where it's been wrapped in a sepia type old world photos things, and it actually looks quite good. So that made me feel a little bit more comfortable about what it would look like. And I also appreciate that we're just going to do a few, see how it looks, see what the reaction is, and then just move gradually from there. So, some trepidation, but I think in the end that I can get myself over the line to, if this is there even for a year, I think it would be worthwhile while we look at something a little bit more sophisticated for our main street. I think we can do something better with a little bit of, well, actually probably not that difficult, but I think this will be a good fix in the meantime while we work through a longer term solution. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovic.
No trepidation here. I think that they are a step in the right direction. And certainly I think that Councillor Burns should be praised for the initiative. It's about lifting the streetscape, and it'll certainly be picked up well by retailers, I do believe, and I think it's a very worthy initiative. And if it, I think the proof will be in the pudding, and I think others will want it once the first stage is successful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor De Vries.
I'm sorry I was absent for that. debate. But yeah, I actually think it could lead to some interesting future thinking as well if we give it a try. But maybe we could have art competitions on planter boxes. Sorry for that. But I actually think it's pretty creative, and it can turn something that's essentially pretty ugly to the eye to be reasonably attractive and interesting. The only drawback might be it distracts people as they're crossing the road because they want to look at the pictures. But yeah, it's if it's done on a really small scale trial basis, I'd say that's fine. My only reservation was that they may deteriorate, and then you've put the cost in and then they've just deteriorated. So I've actually noted in the officer's report that that's a concern, which is why I'd like it to be fairly limited. So there is a question there that I've obviously missed. How many planter boxes were we having in mind through you, Mayor?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. It's in part 2 of the resolution, so 19 as an initial trial.
Any other speakers? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen, and I will hop in just to clear up a couple of points quickly, and I do appreciate everybody's enthusiasm. I was a bit nervous on this one, and actually was calmed down at several stages by Councillor Hemsley with certain conversations we had. Look, it's not, the idea is, firstly, it's 19 boxes, and we start at the top of Rockaby Road at Bagot, and we go to Barker and just do that section. It tells a story. Obviously, it will involve the staff in the museum. We have a multitude of photographs. I'm not trying to tell a story about Rockaby Road. This is a story about Subiaco. I'm thinking of the time period roughly between like 1895 and 1915. So photos, whether they're of people, Rockaby Road of course itself, there's old photos from the football in that time, there's photographs from homes, just the public in general, anything that we can put together. To clear up a couple of points that have concerned Councillor DeVos raised maintenance. These vinyl wraps are PVC coated. They can last in the sunlight for about 7 years. So I'd be surprised if they're still here in 7 years. As to the cost, I am in disagreement with the staff. They came up with a number thinking it was around $500 and do mention closing the road. I priced them to make sure that I wasn't stepping outside a number that the CEO couldn't actually move forward on that would come in under $10,000 so that there wouldn't be any tendering delays and things like that. Basically, you can wrap about 27 of these boxes. That's produced the vinyl, and all they really need is the graphic images. They produce the vinyl, they physically install them, and for 27 would still be slightly under $10,000. Now, the other thing I would caution people on, and I don't really need to, but I'm going to say it anyway. When I joined council in 2013, I entered the doors and we were right in the middle of a discussion about redoing Rockaby Road from one end to the other, okay? And I do appreciate the staff bring up that the boxes aren't great and Rockaby Road could use a lift, okay? And I'm more than happy for that to be looked into, ad infinitum. But when I came in 2013, at the end of 2013, it seems a discussion had started at the beginning of 2012 and about $300,000 had been spent on consultants looking to redo Rockaby Road from one end to the other. So there's a lot of money, and all of those plans are somewhere behind the doors in that direction, and at the end of the day, nothing was found acceptable and nothing happened. What that led to was a very quick fix by CEO Hill, who was here just on a locum basis, or my word, acting, just because we thought we were about to be amalgamated. And he attempted, with good intent, to put some indoor domestic fiberglass boxes in and put plants into them. It looked great until the sun came out, and then the soil heated up to about 300 degrees and they all dropped in one day. So that didn't work. We then moved on to the boxes, which, as Councillor Stroud said, which sounded like a great idea until we saw them. Okay, and now I'm going to really finish quickly. The boxes seem to fall strangely, and I say this out of interest. I only find people argue two things. One, they can't stand them by the colour, right, and these triangular shapes on them, or they're infuriated by the fact they're all slightly skewed, right, or some of them are flat and some of them are slightly out of balance. But I do believe you can straighten them up by just twisting knobs, screws on underneath them. So they're not liked, okay? Now, I did mention that we are a decade later. So a decade later, and it was, I'm going to really finish up quickly, a decade later, and to quote George Santayana, who came up with the expression that everybody seems to love and gets wrong, that those that do not...
Maybe just take another minute, Councillor Burns, just press the button.
We don't want to upset George Santayana, who was a Spaniard, so I'll say Jorge Santayana, who came up with those basically that don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. So a decade later, I'd like to see we just kick off with something, have a look at it, see if the public like it. I think they're going to talk about it. I think they're going to demand that we move into the 3 other sections of the street. That's my prediction. If I'm wrong, I'll live with being wrong. And I'll leave it at that. And I really do thank everybody for the kind words they've said. Thank you.
Were you closing or speaking, Councillor Burns?
Well, if anybody else wants to speak, I wasn't closing. Closing.
Well, this highlights the problem with reserving one's right to speak, but what we'll do is we'll take that as your speech. We'll hear from Councillor Powell, and then if there's nothing more, we'll ask you to close. Councillor Powell.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. I've got more of a question. It's about about the end of point 2, an elected members workshop to gauge community reaction, and then point 3, should the trial be deemed successful and elected members were of a mind to continue the vinyl wrapping. Now, workshops cannot make decisions, so should it really be that it would have to come back to council before this to give the CEO authority to continue with the project?
A question for the CEO, I think. How do you interpret that?
The councillor's quite right in relation to it's not an elected... when we have strategic workshops, we're not making decisions, but it'd be up to council if they wish for us to have this considered again. There's a lot of matters that are determined, I suppose, at budget time as well. So it could well be that you give indication that you'd like to adopt the budget relating to this element, and the decision is actually made at the time when you adopt the budget. So there's a number of ways this could be dealt with. The budget would be the most easiest, I suppose, in terms of rather than bringing a separate matter back to council. But I'd be open to council giving us some indication in that regard.
So I'll ask a question. CEO, is there enough in the elected members' motion for you to take comfort that if this is carried and the trial goes successfully, we can extend or continue the rollout of the planter box wrapping in a bigger way through budgeting and other processes?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. So it would be easy to incorporate within a budget review, or if it's at the time of adopting the budget.
Any other speakers or questions before Councillor Burns closes? Councillor Burns, did you wish to close?
Very briefly, I also calculated the number. There's 47 boxes altogether, and if we wrap 19, I think even though I'm not going to disagree with the CEO putting into the budget or however he chooses fit, but if the public do like this and want us to continue, the number would still fall under $10,000 to do the balance of it. But I will say that, and I hope people do read into it, I don't intend to see we just go straight down the street and finish off. I think we're telling a story here, it's a narrative. We do the first section, then we move to Barker to Churchill, Churchill to Hay, and then Hay, and we finish off down and things. I don't think there's any reason to give it all away at once. We just tease it out, and whether it takes a year or whatever, and we just slowly tell the story down the street. And with any luck, I'm not condemned for my idea later on, and if I am, I don't blame any of you for supporting me. Thank you very much.
I'll call the vote. It's carried unanimously. That brings us to 11.4, investigation into redesigning the council chamber and furnishings, from Councillor Burns once again, who will move the item, and Councillor Jennings, who I'll take as a seconder. Councillor Burns, did you wish to speak? I'd encourage you to speak rather than reserving.
You get me every time. You had me at encouraged. All right, what did I say in the first place? All right, the council chamber. Look, this is something I'll put forward. I heard a lot of talk about it since being elected again to council. It seems there was a lot of talk, but nobody seemed to be doing anything, so I just decided to add it as an elected member's motion to give it consideration. Look, I appreciate the staff comments, and I appreciate things they'll put in there. I think some of them are unnecessary, but they're in there anyway. I think it is worth noting, even though I don't think it matters, that the money that was spent beforehand. But from everything I can see, the money was spent without actually the elected members deciding to spend it. Now, I may be wrong, but nobody can tell me that to look to any agenda item where the chamber dealt with it and decided to move forward and appreciated it. So I don't the past permanent CEO, it seems from hearsay anyway, so I can't say more than that, literally just went ahead and did it. I did speak to Councillor Rowe about this and asked what his recollection was, and it was he didn't quite remember when it was done, but he remembered leaving the chamber after one meeting. There was some break into, so I gather it was Christmas or sometime, and coming back and just seeing that it had been rebuilt in a different form and was almost in shock. So I will leave it to to the Deputy Mayor, who's obviously going to have a pretty good idea about it, or anybody else that was around that maybe perhaps got the same shock to it. Now, going back to my motion, all I've asked is, I've kept this as simple as I can. I'm just asking the CEO to take a look at it, okay? Come back to us when we sit again, right? And not so much, I'm really not interested in, well, look, okay, if it's $150,000 to put in, look, I know I've examined the object. I wasn't trying to be rude when I said object. I've examined the podium and what's upon it. Taking it out is not an expensive exercise, right? What we do as a choice after that is really what the CEO puts forward. Now, that really, going back to what Councillor Hammersley spoke about before, and I'm going to finish on this note, talking about we could have nothing or we could have the Taj Mahal of indoor recreation facilities. I think that falls to the CEO. The CEO can come back and say, well, arguably I can go to IKEA and buy a bunch of desks and pop them in here, or I can go to my favourite marble worker in Wanneroo and have him carve the greatest desk you've ever seen in your life. So I'm really putting it in the CEO's hands to use his sensible attitude, right, and come back to council and say, look, if we did decide that the podium wasn't appropriate, and that is a choice of the elected members, that these are the sort of things you could do. And that's all I'm asking for. Now, I would like to hear from my fellows, because I think I've spoken to a lot of people individually. Everybody's got their own opinions of, one, what took place and what should take place. So I'm going to put it in the hands of the elected members, and thank you for encouraging me to speak first, Mayor McMullen.
I just wanted to get it out of the way. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just be brief. Obviously, I support the idea of getting these this a redesign, as in presenting a possible options for redesigning the chamber, so that removes the podium or the stage. I'm not quite sure what you call that structure up there. I think it was an issue. I think that elected members weren't consulted, as far as same thing hearsay on my part, because I wasn't on council then, but we were told that it was happening, and it was happening over the 2019-20 break, and that's when it did happen. And when we had the special council meetings in January the 6th, 2020, the chamber was all but ready, and that was how it went down. But so any decisions about the chamber were made before my time, which was October 2019 when I was elected. Anyway, it is an issue, I guess, because the chamber is our space, council space, and I guess that we should be the ones who decide how the chamber looks, subject to not spending an arm and a leg. And there'll be a range of options, I guess, in possible designs, as long as it's not going to cost too much, and it results in maybe more flexibility. I think that was sold on the basis that it would create a more flexible chamber, but I've never seen that removed or used actually for any other purpose, so I don't know about that aspect of the flexibility down that end. The flexibility certainly came from the desks being square and being able to move aside or stack together more easily. And then the final piece of this puzzle is the beautiful original furniture that was here, the tables, custom built, I understand, similar to the desks in the committee room. I inquired what happened to them, but I never got a firm answer, and I really would like to know what happened to that furniture, because it was rather beautiful, and it was, in a style that was, or the aim of it was to make the chamber more accessible and egalitarian, so that it was, everyone was on the one level. So I favour that kind of design myself. So anyway, I'm happy to get this design done, so long as it doesn't take too much time and effort from staff, and see where that goes. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through the Chair. I think Councillor Jennings' words about egalitarian are very true here. I think we haven't focused enough on the community who come here to present their statements and their petitions. This is a fairly intimidating structure in front of them. I've had people tell me that, and I think it's, we need to make this a friendlier place, more welcoming, and I think that's a definite thing that we can achieve. And I would only hope that we do take the community's consideration. It's an intimidating place for people to come here, and something a bit more friendly to make a very important occasion when they're generally, got in a disagreement over a development application, etc. And they want to plead their case, and I think it should be as friendly as we can possibly make it. Thank you.
Councillor De Vries.
Right out of my mouth. Sorry, it's not.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, it's working now. You did take the words right out of my mouth. The word, how does the community feel? Well, when that first came up, the community wasn't too happy, and I personally received a few emails asking me why it had happened, and I made some inquiries, and I think the answer that I got back was around the idea of gravitas. Gravitas is important in certain situations, and I recognise this is an important place for decisions to be made, but there is no need for it to make people feel intimidated. And I think if that is happening, and obviously I can't say that's the case for myself, I don't feel intimidated, but I do have a whiplash injury, so from time to time it's a bit hard turning my neck. But I just really think we've got to think beyond what is it that we've spent money, which I believe is important consideration. But I think into the future, we want to invite people here to feel welcome, and if this structure makes people feel unwelcome, then I think we should consider what other options there might be. And it might not happen in the next 2 years, it might happen a little down the track. But certainly just an investigation is something I think that's worthwhile. But I also feel that looking at some examples of other city chambers, and I've just looked at some images now, there are some really attractive and welcoming sort of the colour of the furniture and the shape, and what we had before was, in my opinion, superior. It was welcoming. So I just feel that if we do some research, we could have a look at some of the other cities in Perth, or towns in Perth, town councils, and see what they're using, and maybe come up with some alternatives that don't have to cost a lot of money. And perhaps that missing furniture can be found and reinstated even. But I'm not saying that a decision would be made to get rid of this. It would just be an investigation, and I'm certainly not, suggesting I would support removing it at this point, but I do support Councillor Byrne's proposal for an investigation. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wondered if this recommendation could be improved by a point 3 with an amendment, a point 3 that a report comes back to council. Because at this stage, the CEO can investigate, but where does he go with it? There's no mention of it actually coming back to us. Now, it's pretty obvious, but, where does it go to from there, from an investigation? We would expect a report or something to come back to us in some form, either to council or to a workshop.
CEO, what are you going to do after you complete your investigations? Maybe just talk us through it.
I think this goes similar to the previous one, where although it's not a decision-making forum in the future, that information would give us guidance as to whether or not council are of the view that this should be a matter that's either adopted at the annual budget or during a budget review. If council are of the view that they would like the report to come back to council as a separate item, I can do that as well. So I'm open to whichever way council wish to address this matter in terms of a resolution at some point in time. You either do it via adopting a budget, or you can do it outside of that via a separate report.
Any other speakers or questions? You've got another question?
No. Need to move an amendment, or are you going to offer the first and second speaker to take that on board, or we're just going to leave it. 'Cause
Perhaps you could explain what the amendment's going to say. Is the suggestion that this will come back to a council meeting, or will we workshop it? Articulate the amendment, and then we'll see if the mover and seconder want to take it on board.
keep it simple, thank you, Mayor, and just suggest a report comes back to council.
I've got a nod from Councillor Burns and Councillor Jennings. Are you happy with that amendment? Okay, we'll take that as incorporated. So the substantive motion will include a new point 3 that says that a report will come back to council. And on that basis, Councillor Stroud, did you want to speak to the substantive item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. When I came in tonight and got into the agenda, the power went out of my computer. There's no way of recharging the computer on these tables that are provided to us, and I find that quite extraordinary, actually. We did have the beautiful bespoke table that was specially designed for this council room that was built in Councillor Henderson's time to replace what was considered at the time an archaic system of a podium-style development. It was built and it had that service where we could all plug in and so on and recharge. We were never consulted on this. I spoke up a bit about it and asked questions. I was assured, don't worry, it was all going to work out. It was going to create more room in the gallery. Well, it didn't. It didn't. It actually took up more room because you can imagine there was another table because there was 12 of us. I was very disappointed in it. You've all seen my emails that I've shared in past history, but I'll share with the public, which I wrote on Tuesday, the 21st of January, 2020. It was to CEO Lavery, dear Rochelle. As a presiding member, it was interesting to experience the new council chamber design at the special council meeting last week. Sitting high on the podium was an uncomfortable feeling. I felt very distant from the gallery and elected members, and I don't consider the design to be contemporary or appropriate. Not only would I like to see an investigation on this, but I would like that podium to go down. To me, it's as symbolic as the Berlin Wall. It needs to come down. It represents a past council that, in the CEO words, the podium was built for gravitas for the mayor. And it really didn't, as far as the other reasons of being designed for disabled and so on, for more disabled access, that was very much taken on board when the bespoke table was built. The new design never went to DAG for their opinion. There was very much in my view, a hidden agenda to this design, and it's quite inappropriate, and I found it quite offensive, and I would like it to go. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to speak because I think it is important that the staff understand where the council as a whole is coming from, but also individual councillors, because I think that should affect and influence the work that happens after this. If they know that there's not support for this setup, I think that would be something of use. So I'm going to disclose that I don't support this setup. This is a council, this is the chamber of the council, and it was said in the staff report it should provide a respectable and comfortable environment, and to me it does neither of those things as a sitting councillor. It's not respectful and it's not comfortable. And I say that because the body that should be visible and at the fore in this public place is the council. And it's important, I think, that our community sees the council as the leading governor of this organisation, which is the City of Subiaco. And it has been said to me by members of the community that they find it very strange to walk into this place and see us sitting down here with the staff sitting up there. Now, these are kind of sensitive things to say, but symbols are important. We have a mayor who wears a chain. That's because it's a symbol. But the symbols about how we present ourselves are also important. And I think it is important that we are at the forefront of people's minds when they come into this place. So I would like to see it go. I would like to see the council sitting together. Now, I really do understand that we're a space challenged organisation. And so as much as I did really like that big table, I can understand the limitations that that has, which is not to say we shouldn't find it, but I can appreciate flexibility as being an important factor, and I'm sure that will come through in the report. But really what I would like to see is something where the council is clearly at the fore and that the advisors, which is the administration, are almost not visible. It's just, I mean, I sort of think back to my time as a lawyer working in the courts, and, you know, that's the sort of thing you have in a courtroom with the judge up there, or the judges, if you're in the Court of Appeal, and the staff sitting in front of them, looking up at them, and the barristers looking up at them. That sort of place, you can understand that formality, and but I think in this place, I think we need to step back from that and get a little bit more down to earth. So I'd really like to see the report try and grapple with all of the competing issues and see what we can come up with. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Question, Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you. I have asked this question, got a response, but I still think it should be on the public record, because I have asked this question before. Where has that table gone? Because it was specially made, it was a bespoke table, it would have cost a lot of money, and I'd like to know, is it in storage? Was it donated? Was it sold? Now, I have asked the Director of Finance about that before, and he said he did not know, which I find quite incredulous, that this organisation does not seem to know what the fate of that table was. So I'd like to know, will there be an inquiry about that? Thank you.
If I could, through the chair, I don't know the answer to that question. I have asked that question, and I will seek to get a response for you, and seek to ask those that were here at the time.
Any other speakers? Okay, I might enter the debate in accordance with the meeting procedures. I was here when the decision was made in relation to the new council chamber fit-out, but unfortunately it wasn't made by me or by any other councillors that I'm aware of. And sitting next to Councillor Powell back in my simpler times, I sat down in my new seat and I thought I didn't particularly like it. It's only a step up from a school desk, and I think councillors need a little bit more than a table when they're going to represent the community and work off laptops and spread out their papers and all the rest of it. So investigation of a new chambers was one of the first things that I raised with the CEO after being elected mayor. So I'm very, very interested in getting this report. I want to signal where I think we're headed with this, though, and that is that I'm personally not supportive of committing large amounts of dollars to remedy this situation. The community didn't necessarily like this fit out when it was unveiled, but I'm pretty certain they're not going to like the thought of us spending tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in rectifying the situation. So, yes, I'm very happy about getting the report, and I think we need the report to understand the options. But I just don't want anyone to think that that we're writing a blank cheque in order to get the working environment that might suit us better. From what I can see since October, this layout works, and accessibility towards council and the way we relate to each other is not so much determined by the height that we sit from the floor, but it's determined by the way we conduct ourselves and work with each other and engage with the community. So if there was any discomfort from the community walking into the chambers in the past and seeing people raised a little bit higher than them on this podium, that might have been a symptom of times gone by, but I'd certainly hope that feeling wouldn't exist now. But given that we're not actually remodelling the chambers at this time, yes, by all means, let's get the report and just think about what the next steps might be. And I'd encourage everyone to think about why we need to change the chambers, what we're trying to achieve, and to ask ourselves whether we can justify the cost once we know what that cost is. I'm just very wary of making changes just because this layout might represent another time which we're all happy to have moved on from. But having expressed those words of caution, I suppose, I commend Councillor Burns for submitting the elected members' motion because I think we all know requests outside of council meetings are one thing, but an elected member's motion is certainly the way to get things moving. So now we've got a clear shared direction from council, that the CEO knows what is being asked of him, and it's going to lead to, I think, some informed discussion about the working environment that we need for ourselves and for the staff who support us at these meetings. So thanks everyone for the debate, and if there's no other speakers, I'll look to Councillor Burns to close.
Thank you, Member McMillan, and I do appreciate you entering the debate. You posed a question about considering what it achieves. I'd say this. I'd say something we've in forums and planning groups and the things we've been doing that's come up time and time again is building I don't want to go into much detail on this because we've all heard it and it's sort of between us, but to a degree, is building a relationship between the staff and the councillors back together. And in saying that, right, you posed a question and I just wrote down one, so I hardly can remember the words of the question, but I wrote down one word and I wrote, that's quality, okay? And while we sit here below you, right, and below the staff, equality is not going to be achieved. It's divisive, okay? Unfortunately, but nobody here is to blame for it, okay? There's not a soul in here that wanted it, thought of it, suggested it, okay? We've all just got landed with it. Now, I'm not professing spending enormous amounts of money, so why? Taking it, I mean, you might have got a lot of money to put it in, but I tell you, it costs next to nothing to put it out, okay? I mean, I get a couple of carpenters in here by the end of the weekend, be gone by Monday, okay? And I'd be more than happy to do it. I'm not going to because I'll get a little bit of trouble with the CEO. Now, But it does concern me about divisive, and something else that was brought to my attention. She knows exactly who she is, and I took it as something I didn't see. I posed a question that I didn't like the idea of looking up at people, right? And this particular councillor said, that's really not the issue, right? The optic is the galleries, okay? How they see us, right? And how we're visualised. This would be a better statement if there was anybody in the gallery. But on the presumption that occasionally there is, right, it is, and that word optic really struck a note with me, right? And that's what we're trying to fix here. And some things do cost money to fix. And going back to, this is exactly what I talked about with Rockaby Road and the failed attempt. When I joined this council, there was a podium. It was against that wall. The councillor sat here and the gallery was there. And we entered the building from over there. You couldn't come in there, you came in through the garden, and it was a very actually nice view because everybody looked out into the garden, it was all open windows, lovely. And then when I joined again, it was after the bespoke table, which I also would like to know exactly who's got it, because I don't think anybody chopped it up for firewood. It's too bloody nice. But so I will be interested in seeing that answer. So the next time I came back, I was at that table. And now on my third time, we're just back to square one. The only difference is the podium's now at this end of the room, not that end of the room. So once again, we go back to this thing that history just keeps repeating itself. And until we learn to stop history repeating itself, and in this case, as I said, nobody here is to blame for it, other than whoever pinched that table. Okay. But I don't want to spend a lot of money. I don't think it needs to spend a lot of money, but we're gonna need to spend enough money to get it right, okay? And it was, keeping this in mind, it was right before. We're just gonna make it right again, okay? And that's an obligation, right? Because otherwise, you know, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I think you know exactly what I appreciate everything everybody said, right? And I appreciate, and that goes to the staff and everybody else. I don't even know that the staff are that happy up there either, okay, looking down at us. Maybe it's uncomfortable for them. I'm not up there to know that. But I'd suspect at least some of them don't think it's a particularly great idea either. That would just be conjecture on my part. But I'm going to leave it at that and I'll put it in your hands for a vote. Thank you very much, everybody.
I'll call the vote. Carried unanimously. 3 from 3. Councillor Burns, well done. As far as I'm aware, there's no business of an urgent nature that anyone wants to raise tonight. So let's move to close the meeting to the public. I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for a procedural motion to close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 5.232A and C of the Local Government Act. The reasons being that we're dealing with 2 matters, one relating to an employee and another relating to a contract that may be entered into by the city. So I'll move in a seconder, please. Councillor Burns, I think that was Councillor De Vries. Let's vote on that, please. Okay, that's been carried unanimously. Thank you, media. Okay, for those members of the public who are watching the meeting, we've voted to come out from behind closed doors, and I'm going to read out versions of the two decisions that were made in confidence. Okay, in item 13.1, Council's resolved to accept the monetary grant referred to in the confidential officer report, and that was carried unanimously 9-0, so that voting record will be reflected in the minutes. And on item 13.2, Council has resolved to Council's resolved three things in relation to the CEO's probationary period. Council has resolved to adopt option 1 as contained within the comments section of the report, and I don't think the CEO would mind me saying that option 1 means that he has passed his probation period. The second point that we've resolved is to defer finalisation of the CEO additional performance criteria as described in the CEO's employment contract until the March 2022 Ordinary Council meeting following strategic workshops in February and March 2022 with the assistance of an external consultant satisfactory to Council. And finally, point 3 of the decision on 13.2 is that Council will appoint the Council, the whole Council, as the reviewer of the CEO's performance as described in the CEO employment contract. And that was also carried unanimously 9-0. Okay, well there's no further business tonight, so it's time to close the meeting, and I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 14th of December 2021 closed at 8:57 p.m. Thanks everyone.